The diner was alive with laughter, sunlight, and the scent of coffee that afternoon, the kind of day that made life feel safe and simple. Plates clattered, music hummed low, and every booth was filled with chatter and comfort. But in a single, heart-stopping moment, that peace shattered like glass. A cruel laugh. A splash of cold water. It hit her, a young pregnant woman sitting quietly in the corner booth. Her name was Grace Holloway, and the water running down her face wasn't just from a glass, it was humiliation poured out in front of strangers. The waiter, Brad, smirked as his friends chuckled. To them, it was a joke. To her, it was a wound she'd never forget. What they didn't know was that Grace wasn't just another customer. She was the wife of Cole Holloway, a man who had once ridden with the Hells Angels but left that life behind for her, for peace, for love, for the promise of a quiet home, and that man, at that very moment, was walking through the door. When the bell above the entrance jingled and the sunlight poured across the floor, the laughter died. Boots thudded against tile. 5 men in leather vests entered, the Hells Angels patch burning bright on their backs. At the front stood Cole, eyes locked on his trembling wife. What happened next wasn't about revenge, it was about love, restraint, and the strength that comes when anger meets compassion, because sometimes, kindness doesn't whisper. It walks in. Wearing leather, the Bluebird Diner sat on the edge of a sleepy town, a place that had seen decades of morning rushes, coffee refills, and the quiet stories of people just trying to get through their days. The walls were lined with faded photos of smiling families and dusty neon signs that flickered in and out. That afternoon, the golden sunlight streamed through the wide front windows, bathing the booths in warmth. It should have been a perfect day for Grace Holloway. She had planned this small outing for herself, just an hour away from home, a plate of pancakes, and the quiet hum of people around her. She hadn't realized how lonely she had been until she sat there, tracing the chrome edge of the table. 7 months pregnant, Grace moved slower now. Every step took effort, every breath carried the weight of 2 hearts. She missed her husband, Cole, the man who had once terrified entire towns but now spent his days fixing motorcycles and his nights whispering to her belly about the future. Their love had begun in fire and found peace in quiet. Cole had walked away from the Hells Angels years ago, leaving behind a brotherhood of chaos and the scars that came with it. Grace had been his reason, soft-spoken, gentle, and strong in ways that had nothing to do with fists or fear. Today, she'd come to the diner because it reminded her of better days, of milkshakes and long rides, of Cole's laughter echoing through this very room. But fate had other plans. Brad, the waiter, noticed her right away. He was young, arrogant, with that kind of false confidence people wear to cover insecurity. When Grace politely asked for her food to be reheated, his pride pricked like a thorn. He grumbled under his breath, rolling his eyes as he walked away. His friends, other waiters in blue uniforms, laughed quietly, feeding his irritation. When he returned, he carried not just her plate, but a glass of water and a cruel smirk. Without warning, he tipped it forward. The water splashed across Grace's face and blouse, shocking her into silence. The diner went still, every conversation dying mid-sentence. The laughter that followed was sharp, ugly, echoing against the walls. Grace's breath caught. Her hands went instinctively to her stomach, protecting the life inside her. The humiliation hit deeper than the water ever could. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't speak. Years of teaching had taught her patience, but this was different. Then the bell above the door jingled. The sound seemed ordinary, but the air changed instantly, a shift that everyone felt in their bones. The sunlight poured in like a spotlight, and through it stepped 5 men, leather boots. Power. Their front was Cole Holloway, and in his eyes burned a calm that was more dangerous than fury. He saw Grace, her soaked clothes, her trembling lips, the fear and shame she tried to hide, and something inside him fractured. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than thunder. The waiters froze. Brad took a step back, realizing too late that his mistake wasn't just cruel, it was fatal to his pride. The laughter had vanished, all that remained was the quiet hum of the ceiling fan and the steady rhythm of Cole's boots as he walked forward. Grace looked up, tears slipping down her cheeks. Their eyes met, hers filled with apology, his with anguish. In that moment, the entire world narrowed to two hearts beating in the middle of a diner that dared to hold its breath. Cole reached her booth and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You all right, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Grace nodded weakly, but her voice shook. "I'm fine," she murmured, though both of them knew she wasn't. Cole's eyes shifted to Brad. The young man's bravado crumbled under that gaze. Cole stepped closer, took the empty glass from the table, and pressed it lightly into Brad's hand. "That's my wife," he said, voice low, steady, unshakable. "You poured water on her. You think that's funny?" Brad swallowed, words caught in his throat. One of Cole's biker brothers, a broad man with a gray beard and kind eyes, took a slow step forward, crossing his arms. The room was deathly still. Grace, trembling but brave, reached out and took Cole's arm. "Cole, please," she whispered. "Not like this. Let's go." Her voice cut through his rage like sunlight through storm clouds. He exhaled slowly, nodding once. Then, with a quiet strength that made the moment unforgettable, he took off his leather vest, the symbol of his past, and draped it around her shoulders. Together, they turned and walked toward the door, but before they could leave, the older biker paused beside Brad. He spoke softly, his tone more sorrow than threat. "Son," he said, "there are two kinds of men in this world, the ones who laugh at pain and the ones who learn from it. Don't ever find yourself on the wrong side again." The bell jingled again as they left, and silence filled the diner like an ocean. Brad stood frozen, the glass trembling in his hand. His friends stared at the floor. For days after, he couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. He replayed it over and over, the sight of Grace's tears, Cole's calm fury, and the way kindness had walked out the door, dignified and silent. Something inside him shifted. Weeks turned into months. The laughter never returned to the diner, but humility did. Brad started working harder, speaking softer. He didn't know why he cared so much, maybe because that day had shown him who he'd become. And who he didn't want to be. Then, one rainy morning, the bell above the door jingled again. Grace Holloway walked in, holding an umbrella and a quiet smile. Brad froze. But this time, there was no arrogance in him, only remorse. He walked up slowly, placed a steaming mug of coffee in front of her, and said softly, "I'm sorry, ma'am. For everything." Grace looked up, her eyes gentle, forgiving. "We all make mistakes," she said. "It's what we do after that matters." Outside, thunder rolled over the hills, but inside that small diner, something healed. As Grace left, she carried her newborn baby in her arms. By the door, folded neatly on a chair, waited Cole's leather jacket, the one he had draped over her that day. She smiled, whispering to her child, "That's your daddy's heart, strong enough to fight, but gentle enough to forgive." And with that, she stepped into the rain, a woman who had turned humiliation into grace, anger into mercy, and pain into something beautiful, because sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is simply walk away, and let kindness speak louder than revenge.